तो आप मेरे को एसएमएस कर देंगे क्या वो नाम बोलना नहीं था मेरे से ये मेरा नाम नाम विनीत मित्तल.
Good evening, everybody. I would like to say that it's a privilege to introduce Devpriya Roy and Rajiv ji. A little bit know-how about Devpriya Roy. She is going to be in conversation with Rajiv ji throughout the evening, and her introduction is that she's done her English literature and performing studies from Presidency College, Calcutta, and Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Then after this, in the course of her research, she also spent time at the University of Paris 8, which is in Paris, on where chocolate croissants are different from different bakeries. And then she went on to do, this is really different, then she went on to do her PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru Institute on Natya Shastra, which is, I don't know how she managed it, also different. And now she has, from past 5 years, she's an author of 2 bestsellers, which is called The Vague Woman's Handbook and The Weightless Club, which is also partly humorous, I believe. Her latest book she's co-authored with her husband, Mr. Saurabh Jha, and it's called The Heat and Dust Project, The Broke Couple's Guide to Bharat, the story of an eccentric adventure across India on a very, very tight budget. That's 500 rupees a day for bed and board for both. So, that says about, it's a book which is written all about India and how safe women are there, you know. They went on a tour to India to understand what India is all about. And now, about Rajiv ji. He is an Indian-American thinker, and he started his career in the US, I think about 45 years back. He went to US when he was only 20 years old, and he studied there for a while, and then he joined ITT company, and he was the corporate executive there, vice president head. And then he went on to management consultant in strategic planning for businesses which were in Fortune 20, like British Telecom, AT&T, France Telecom. These are only to name a few. And then 22 years back, he dropped everything to do what he's currently doing, which is philanthropy, and he's doing a groundbreaking job in research on Indian civilization, and he has currently authored 5 really, really great best-selling books. And I would give the mic to Rajiv ji now, and it is better he explains you the transformation from being an entrepreneur to what he's currently doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think I have this. Thank you for organizing this. I'm at the end of, almost at the end of a tour. So this is sort of towards the end of my trip, also an evening to relax and be with friends and be very casual and informal. One of the rare occasions I can sit and talk. So my background is very westernized in formal education. Like many of us, went through a convent education and St. Columba's School here in Delhi, and then St. Stephen's College. And a lot of my ex-Stephanian friends and ex-Columbus friends they wonder what happened to me, because I turned out to be different. And I'll tell you a little bit about what happened to me. I was at one time, before my transformation, I had 20 companies I'd started. After my management consulting, when you're a consultant, one of the frustrations is that you think your ideas are great and the client is paying you a lot of money, but then he may or may not implement. And so sometime I decided I'll just implement my own ideas. AT&T actually funded me for a project that they later wished they had done, but they funded me to do it. So I started my venture with their money. This is before venture capital in this area was popular. So it became a big success. So then I left in '94 because I had some spiritual transformation, which is a very personal kind of a thing. And I decided to leave all this and start my own foundation, and decided I'll give it back to society and discover and explore and research. So I became a researcher, writer, public speaker. That's what I do full time. It's not a hobby. What I do is not a hobby. It's not something on the side, but this is all I do. And the topic of my work is about Indian civilization. Indian civilization, its place in the world, uh, where it's misrepresented, where it's properly represented, and the issues are not only in the West, issues are also in India. A lot of people in India are also alienated or partially alienated or confused. And to some extent, it's because the education system was colonial and we all learned a certain way, except for the things we learn at home or in our own community. Much of what we are taught in the schools and so on is not our traditional view of things. So I wanted to go back and reconnect with traditional experts and learn for myself and then be able to expound on it publicly. That's what I do. And my foundation has given a lot of grants to other people. We used to give grants that I started. I ended that part of the project and started doing the work myself. So that's what I've done for the last 15 years, is just my own research and articulation. Now, I think we'll get into a conversation about what are some of the reasons I feel the corporate sector needs to be interested in Indian civilization, because we all have a private life. We may be practicing something, and I'm going to argue that that's fine, that's great, we should have that, but there is also a good case for bringing this out in a social, public kind of a way. Before I do that, I just want you to know that there are three main constituencies that I talk to, that I get traction from. And I would like the fourth one to be the corporate sector. I've talked to YPO in Chennai, very big success in Calcutta also, and various other one-off events here and there. CII in Delhi had me deliver a distinguished lecture. But in terms of real solid traction, the three sectors are, one is students in IIT Bombay, IIT Madras, Indian Institute of Science, these kind of very prestigious institutions, JNU, Delhi University. The crowds are becoming more and more, the invites are getting stronger. There's more than I can possibly give to them. Even though I come 4 times a year, I just cannot deliver that much as the demand calls for. But it indicates that things have really changed in recent years. Previously, people were not that interested, but right now the young people are very interested. And they come to me saying, you know, our parents didn't teach these things. We need to know. Our teachers are alienated from culture. They're too much to the left wing. So that's created this demand. The second group are ashrams, gurus, swamis, the spiritual side. Sri Sri Ravi Shankar launched my book in his ashram in Bangalore just a few weeks ago with Chinmaya Mission, Mata Amritanand Mai's University, Ramakrishna Mission. These are some of the places that have hosted me over the years. And then the third, and in that situation, I'm not teaching them Hinduism because they know what they need to know. But there is an aspect on how you project your identity outside, how you answer questions, how you handle embarrassing situations, how you negotiate your identity, how do you respond to all the stereotypes. That's where their members feel that their teachings are inadequate. And so I'm brought in usually by the young members telling their guru, saying, call him because he can answer our questions. So everywhere I go in these organizations, it's the inner circle of Sri Sri, for example, who are very connected with me, and they ask Sri Sri, you please invite him again. So I keep going back. That's the gap I fill. That's the gap I fill. And the third is civic society and political type of groups. Tomorrow I go to the BJP headquarters for a talk. A lot of the Sangh-related talk, people have invited me. But I want to be clear, I'm not a part of any political group. I'm not a member. And I go because they invite me. So if the Congress invited me, I'd be happy to go. If CPM invited me, I'd be happy to go. Because I'm an author looking for audiences. And whoever gives me an audience, I'll go. So they happen to invite me, so that's why I go. These are the three constituencies. My sense is that in India, there is about 25% of extreme sides. 25% who are very, very solidly Hindu, Dharmic, Vedic practitioners who are not afraid to project this identity, who are very sort of sure and rooted about this identity. We may say there's 80% Hindus, but I think there's about 25% who are assertive Hindus in that sense. Then at the opposite end, there are 25% who are certainly opposed to this. They could be leftists, they could be something else, but they have very serious problems, and that's the opposite camp. My interest is the 50% middle who are confused, who are vacillating, who are open-minded, who may have a certain private conviction but don't want, who may not even be that sure. That is my target. When I write for really those people to clarify things. And their reference point is the global westernized, anglicized discourse. And so I write in terms of that. I write using a lot of metaphors and idioms that they would feel comfortable in. I'm writing for the English readership. So that's, in a nutshell, what I do. So now, let's hear some.
So, the first thing that I wanted to start with is that for me, recently, a friend of ours, he is a former Australian diplomat. He's an Indian migrant.
Yes.
He's about 75 years old. And he retired as the High Commissioner to India from Australia. He works on something which I think has not really caught on in India yet. It's called cultural intelligence. And he is an expert on mapping civilizational values.
Right.
So he's invited across the world to give lectures because he specializes in civilizational values of the West, of Russia, of the US, and India. Now, strangely, he's being called more and more to China these days.
Right.
Strangely, what he rues all the time is that he's never been invited by Indian corporates to talk about civilizational values or cultural intelligence. So the first thing that I want to ask you, Raji, he links it to a certain arrogance of the Indian mind, which I know you have also talked about, and we'll come to that in a bit. But first I want to ask you, why do industrialists of various countries study civilizations?
Yeah. So the East India Company started this field called Indology, not out of love, but to understand the people of India in order to be able to rule over them, negotiate with them, partner them, divide and rule. So it was to understand. United States CIA has a lot of funding for Islam studies, studying foreign languages. During the Soviet era, there was a huge amount of grants for learning Russian. So you can study the other. Studying the other is something the West does very well. Now, when I was in ITT, we used to get corporate executive orientation for any delegation going somewhere. So I remember going to Japan, leading a delegation. The specialists came and they taught us how to bow, how much to bow, who bows first, you or the other side. And it has to do with the relative seniority in age and the relative seniority in rank. And if you don't bow enough, you are arrogant. If you bow too much, you are obsequious. So you bowing the right etiquette. So this little nuance. So the Americans are very good at that. It's part of the corporate training. And then I found that the study of India is thriving in China. We did a Vedic conference, and a delegation of 8 or 9 Chinese came. And I thought maybe they were dissidents, they're not allowed to do these things. But they said, no, the government actually funds them, and they have hundreds of Chinese scholars who study Indian civilization. They study Sanskrit, they study Buddhism,
Exactly.
They study Vedas and all that.
This time at the book fair, China was the official guest, and they brought in so many writers to come and interact with Indian writers, find out more about what books to read.
Right. And a friend of mine, an Indian, has a corporate coaching business to teach negotiation skills. So he runs a thriving business where he has multinational clients, and he teaches he takes a group of them, executives, for so many days, and he teaches them how to negotiate. And he says what Indians do is called haggling, it's not negotiation, and he'll tell you what the difference is. And so he also got, I think, Reliance or Tata's, one of these guys also brought him in. But now he's become a specialist in a particular kind of negotiations, which is intercultural.
Intercultural negotiation.
Where this somebody is going to negotiate in China or somebody is going to negotiate somewhere, and they need to know what are the cultural nuances, how you negotiate with them. So that's another study of civilizations that matters. A friend of mine in Princeton is on the board, on the diversity board. American multinationals, one of the fashionable things is to create a diversity board. So she just got onto the diversity board of Toyota, and there's other diversity boards she's on. And the diversity board studies different cultural civilizational identities, because these companies have people all over the world. They are their employees, they are their partners, they are their suppliers, they have to not make a fool of themselves, they must know how to say, what to say. So this business of diversity as a form of civilizational studies is also very important. And there are major programs sponsored by multinationals on China studies, Japan studies, Islam studies, Russia studies. And now a big demand for how to understand Modi. This is when Modi got elected, people thought I should go and give seminars. Now, of course, I'm not available to do that. But there's a huge demand for that. So the Westerners are very interested, but I don't find the Indian multinationals and corporates as interested. I will give you an example, my Tata group, and when they acquire a company, a foreign company, in Africa, whereas US, her job is to go and kind of give them the Tata orientation. So she was staying with me, and they acquired something in the Midwest. So I was very keen to understand her experience. And I don't want to get into specific details because I don't want to talk personal stuff. But I must say she was incredibly naive about what the Midwest, she didn't understand this is Midwest. The Midwest white culture is different.
It's different from...
You cannot say certain things.
The New York cosmopolitan...
Didn't understand these things. And she was sort of like telling them how it is and just complaining that they don't get it. I said, no, you don't get it. You must first study them before you can say any of these things. Because she said their reaction was, oh, all this is fine, we respect the parent company, but we really don't need all this. In a sense, kind of very politely dismissive. And she wasn't sufficiently equipped to negotiate that with them.
So I think this is a very important point, that we don't take negotiation seriously enough. So the preparation, the homework, the level of research that companies, and I would hazard even sort of political teams do for, say, American leaders or for American companies, we don't match that. So at some point we are falling short. I hope that, with you raising more and more awareness about it, this is going to slowly, there's going to be a shift in this.
Even the Foreign Service, I'm very disappointed.
Oh, terribly.
For the last 10, 15 years, I've been looking at the Indian Consul General in New York. They're completely out of touch. There was one fellow who somebody said, you should go meet this fellow and he'll tell you about what's going on in the academic world and media, about our culture and all. So he came to see me, and then he invited me to his place, and he would start calling me whenever he was invited. So once he was invited to a South Asian conference in Harvard, and he was driving there on his limo, and on his way he called me and he says, ki ye conference ho rahi hai, aise hoga, what should I say? So I said, first you tell me who are the other speakers. And he told me the names of these speakers. He didn't know them. And I said, this guy is a Khalistani, this one fellow. This other fellow is very radical Pakistan guy. And this is a ambush. And they're going to make a really thing out of you. So he was very scared. So I read out. I told him, here are some of the facts. You should be prepared that if you've been invited and this is the kind of group it is, you should be prepared. So he actually got quite nervous and didn't go there. But then he got he started talking to me about it, and I said the Ministry of External Affairs, the State Department in the US would never have a prominent person go off without homework.
Without homework,
and they would really know who's who, and they would know a lot about him. But I was surprised that this government of India, they don't have even now, I don't think they have a think tank. I have met, I've met the new External Affairs Minister, and extremely well-meaning, extremely decent, extremely connected, very hard-working, all of that. But I feel that the support team just don't have the depth of understanding the others in civilizational terms.
Absolutely. To understand strategy and to keep up with the amount of research that is going on around the world on all the desks, I think we need a paradigm shift somewhere. I just recently met the new Foreign Services Officers bunch. They are being trained in the Foreign Services Institute.
I did that.
Yeah?
I attended that one. I gave a seminar there.
Exactly. So they are so pleased with having become Foreign Services officers, because from the time children are young, we keep telling them that they have to do well in exams. So these are kids who've done the best. Some of them are doctors, some of them are from the IITs, and now they've become IFS officers. It's almost as though it's done for them. They don't realize that this is the beginning of the journey, and this is where it begins.
I had a very interesting experience. The director of FSI, the Foreign Services Institute,
yeah.
invited me last year to give a talk to the whole new batch of about 30 of them. And my talk was on Indian civilization and its place in the world and its place in diplomacy, and how the Chinese project it, how the Japanese project theirs. The Korea Foundation has come up with books on Korea, which every library is given. The China Foundation, all of these foundations for nations are doing this work. Nobody's doing it for India. And what are some of the issues that diplomats will face? And I must say the group was 50-50 polarized. There were those who were so happy. They came to me, they said, we want to learn more. Tell us, these are things we are not taught. I thought they would be taught. The others were very upset. This bothered me. I would say at least half the people said, what India? I come from Northeast. I don't understand what India. Is it the Dalits India? Is it this guy's India? Which India? So they had this sense of there is no such thing as my topic was the Indian grand narrative and how you project the Indian grand narrative overseas. And they were completely against this idea of such a thing as an Indian grand narrative. There is a narrative for this group and a narrative for that group. And it shocked me that these are the people who will be representing India. And who is this India that they are representing is not that clear to them. Now they are very well indoctrinated on what's the Kashmir policy and this and that, nuclear policy. But on civilization and culture, the sense of unity, continuity, I didn't see that they were convinced enough and knowledgeable enough. So I have that issue with them.
So what is your assessment of Indian leaders vis-a-vis others in this respect?
Well, Chinese, when you negotiate with a Chinese person or a Japanese person, there is a level of negotiation which is very sort of industry specific. You're buying this, buying that. It's all about details of that particular product. And of course, the country don't enter the picture. But at some point, when you build a close bond and you build a deeper relationship, you will realize that these people are exceedingly sure of who they are. The sense of who I am as a Chinese, a collective identity, is very clear in them. And I don't see the Indian as secure, as comfortable in his skin. Either it doesn't matter, we're all the same anyway, okay, a kind of a postmodern kind of a view, or a very sort of kind of a very narrow view, or a particular sectarian view. But an American, I was very impressed when I worked for American corporates that senior executives were so detailed in their knowledge of the founding fathers and the sense of history, the values, the philosophy. I mean, they really knew their stuff because that grounding is very clear. The sense of Western classics, as studying the Western classics as a sign of being very sophisticated, whereas who would study the traditional Indian texts as a sign of being very savvy?
Or the Indian literatures in the Indian languages.
Yes. So I think I feel that the Indian has gambled on the assumption that these boundaries of identity will go away, but they're not going away. If you look at how the identities are popping up in the West, Islam, this one, that one, how these identities are popping up. In fact, it's more identity conscious than maybe 20 years ago. So this prediction of the postmodernists that these things will vanish, boundaries will vanish, we'll live in one global era, is not happening.
Absolutely.
Boundaries are erecting, if anything.
One needs to just look at the visa rules to understand that the West, what we mean by the West, is definitely an entity that sees itself as one when it comes to other parts of the world.
Yeah, and there's also, when Mittal was buying the steel, the French,
Arcelor?
there was a lot of negative press on him being Indian. I have clippings of that in the French media. Now, you know,
And every time there are layoffs, there are huge demonstrations and
Tatas, when they had some problems, then they turn it into a ethnic, racial kind of a thing. And I've seen, I've stayed with the SP Hinduja 15, 20 years ago in Geneva, and he discussed all these things. It was affecting him. How the sense of who he is, whether, no matter how hard he tries to say none of this matters to me, but it matters to the other person. So there are stereotypes through which they're looking at you, and you have to understand enough to say, okay, I anticipate they're probably thinking of these things, whether they're saying it or not, because they're very polite. What am I going to say as and when required?
right.
What am I supposed to know about them? The deeper level, the surface level, is a very secular, industry-specific dialogue.
Very civil sort of,
I mean, IT, we
polite.
talk about IT, we do this software, this kind of thing, and we don't, it's like don't ask, don't tell. I won't tell you, and you don't ask me things that are awkward. The don't ask, don't tell is an American term. During the Clinton era, they wanted to know what to do about gays in the military because the laws were against gays. And it was very politically incorrect to continue that law. But there was also a large segment of the military that didn't want to make it official, didn't want to make it public and official that people can be openly gay. So how to strike a balance? And they came up with this law which says don't ask, don't tell. Meaning you won't be asked, and you don't
volunteer the
you
information.
don't voluntarily tell. Keep it unstated. So this don't ask, don't tell, I feel is also sort of the de facto posture a lot of Indians have vis-a-vis their civilizational identity. Indians are very comfortable talking about Bollywood, cricket, pop culture, cuisine, these kind of pop things. But Americans have a pop culture too. But beneath the pop culture level, which is all harmonizing and everything is very global and so on, there is a deep culture. There is a deep culture which is beneath the pop culture, which is very specific, very historically oriented.
So
very
an American identity.
There's a very deep American identity at multiple. There are 3 levels of American identity. I gave a series of lectures at India International Center 10 years ago. There's 3 levels of identity. There is this very deep Judeo-Christian identity, and how it has formed over 200-300 years. Then I call the top level is pop culture, which is very easy. Everybody here enjoys it. In between is the institutions. These institutions are very robust institutions, and they protect the deep culture, and they perform and play the pop culture.
Right.
So there's a 3-level cake that you have to understand to really get to the bottom of it. When you're talking to an American, you can be talking at the pop culture level, it's very easy. You can be talking at an institution level, it's our institution, their institution, negotiating. But if you really understand them, you must understand their deep culture level.
So, there's an allied question along with this, that you've spent 4 decades, more than 4 decades, in fact, in the US. So are there any sort of key things about Americans that you want to share, more in addition to what you just said?
Yeah.
Especially in the ease of doing business, understanding them?
Yeah, I think one of the important things is their history of immigrants and each negotiating their place as a hyphenated identity. Irish American,
Italian American,
Jewish American, Hispanic American, Black American, Chinese American, and now Indian American. I've studied this very systematically, very clinically, taken a lot of courses, delivered lectures, written about it, discussed.
Spoken to people.
With many different hyphenated groups to understand their history and how they negotiated. It's a very clear process which Indians must learn to go through. And Indians are a little confused because we don't come with that strong identity. Other than the pop culture. So that's the formation of American identities. And it's a very, there is the Irish Day Parade, there is the Japanese Day Parade, India Day Parade, Pakistan Day Parade, Chinese Day Parade. There's all these, about 50 ethnicities that have annual parades in central New York City, and everybody celebrates, and the mayor comes and all that stuff. That's a sort of a showcase in one city of what the nation is all about. So the celebration of your hyphenated identity is strong. It's not going away. And to become fully American, you don't have to stop being an Indian. This is very different than maybe in European countries where perhaps it's not as easy to assert your separate identity. And this is why, Muslims it's not as difficult in the US until these recent problems have happened.
After 9/11.
As it has been in European countries. Because the ability to negotiate your hyphenated, what does this hyphen consist of, how Indian am I, and how do I Indianize America? What do I bring to the American tapestry about India and say this is now American, I'm bringing this to you. I mean, there's yoga, there's all kind of things that they really like. And this is all negotiated. So you retain who you are, and you also become fully American without having to compromise your distinctiveness. It's a very interesting American phenomenon. I don't know if this exists elsewhere.
Right.
So this is a part of the whole thing.
So, what also interests me is our response, we in India, our response to America, and how I think we refuse to update ourselves at a deeper cultural level. For instance, popular culture is all fine, like you said, but we never look at, say, the evidences contained in literature. Serious fiction exposes the underbellies, the various fault lines within America, and it exists. A lot of fiction which talks about the Indian underbelly is championed in the West. It wins awards, it's written about. Whereas we never seem to be able to do the opposite.
Well, one of my pet peeves is how our literary festivals are really run by foreigners or Indians who got a foreign lens, with authors based on who will be appealing to those guys, to the rest. I don't know any other place which is like that. I don't think the Chinese are that interested in what is the bestseller in the United States, nor do I think the Americans would be very impressed if some Chinese guys or Russian guys were running the literary festivals. So we have this issue with media. Most of these Barkha Dutt and Rajdeep Sardesai, these kind of people, they all got degrees from Columbia School of Journalism and so on. They're great schools, but it has influenced their lens. It has influenced their way of looking. I think in that sense, the Indian language journalists are more authentically Indian. So this English language has also penetrated the style of thinking. And so we are studied from the outside. The most prestigious place to get a degree in Sanskrit is not any Indian place. It's a toss-up between
Heidelberg,
Harvard, Chicago,
Columbia.
Columbia, maybe Oxford, Heidelberg, these kind of few places. If you go to Banaras Hindu University, you go to Karnataka Sanskrit University, very traditional. You go to the top universities, Sanskrit universities in Chennai. I've been doing that tour. You go to Delhi University Sanskrit. You ask the young people, where would you rather get a degree? They all tell you they'd rather get the degree there. And where do you publish your paper to be known? You publish in one of those journals. And
obviously then you write it in English.
You write, and you also submit to what will be accepted. The referees will keep rejecting. In fact, 2 or 3 people in the talks I've been having, 2 or 3 of the panelists gave their experiences, that they had a certain interpretation, that's the traditional interpretation, it would keep getting rejected, and to be allowed to speak at an international conference, they had to settle for something that the other guys would accept. So I don't know any other civilization whose study as a civilization is driven from the outside. This is a very peculiar Indian phenomenon. And Chinese control all the China studies journals. They are run out of China. The peers and the experts, the editorial people, they're all Chinese people. So the Westerners who want to become credentialed in China studies in Princeton or Harvard or wherever, they have to make sure they're in the good books, the Chinese, not the other way around. And similarly for Japan, similarly for Korea, similarly for Russia, those countries treasure their civilizational study as a big asset, as a national asset. They have to control. We haven't controlled the brand.
We haven't been able to. Exactly. And it's also very complicated because recently, it's not that the government has not spent money on Sanskrit. So you have a lot of Sanskrit universities, but unless we are able to make it cool and attractive, unless we are able to attract people, it can never be fixed in that way. It's not just a question of money. It's a question of imagination.
Just how to mentally de-traumatize, de-stress, relax. And this is Yoga Nidra. So you go to all of this. relaxation response, which got so much money from the National Institute of Mental Health to study to teach people all these things, is actually transcendental meditation. So I track all these things. Our own people don't seem to know that this has got huge brand value.
And they don't
Not
seem to
only
care.
products. One is at the product level. You could make actual products. The other is as a national brand of who we are. As a country's brand, we need to do that. And then things like, if you ask a marketing company that what is the profile, the behavior profile of liberal white, particularly liberal white woman. So the profile will be that she goes and does yoga. And she's a vegetarian.
Vegetarian.
And she's animal
Buys
friendly. She's animal
fair
friendly.
trade coffee.
She's animal friendly and eco-friendly. So why don't we take khadi and brand it as eco-friendly textile? Because this world wants these kind of images. So how you brand India, what it is good for, can be a national resource, and not only for the people who are in those products, but even if you're selling some machinery or you're selling whatever you're selling, your reputation, your image of who you are as a supplier will be associated with that. Brand means what you're associated with unconsciously.
So basically, we are sort of doing, it's a double whammy. We are not looking at who we are, not understanding that deeply, nor do we also know enough about the others to understand these specific niches that exist which can be
and both
catered
have to be done together. We have a tradition we lost. It's called Purva Paksha and Uttar Paksha. And I explain that in my book. Purva Paksha means studying the other. So the Vedantins study the Buddhists, and they study the other guys, this and that. The school of thought studies other schools of thought, other intellectual ideas, other communities. That's called Purva Paksha. And Uttar Paksha is my response to that. So we've been debaters, we've been into studying others for a long time and positioning ourselves and giving an answer. That's called competitive research. That's
Absolutely.
Today, industry research, competitive research is what we call Purva Paksha, Uttar Paksha.
And as they say that there were sometimes these famous debates between Buddhist monks and Sanatanis where they did Purva Paksh, they did Uttar Paksh, and the one who lost would burn himself to death. So the price of losing a debate was one's own life. And now I see these things which are called debates, which are hardly debates, which are people enclosed in silos who don't know about the other person's worldview and who come to a TV studio to just scream at each other, encouraged by the moderator. So from a culture of debating, we have really sort of fallen into complete sort of silo behavior.
Yes, I think we're fragmented into camps of anger. Mutual conflict, it is getting worse. This whole fragmenting a society into little groups and even smaller groups. Democracy, rather than healing and uplifting, it's turned into a caste is more like a combat lobby group. We have in the US we have political lobby groups. In Washington there's thousands of them. For the cigarette industry, for the nuclear industry. Industries have them, ethnic groups have them, religion has them. Every ideology kind of has their own lobby groups. And I think in India, they're caste groups. So maybe it's because lobby groups are not legal, or they're not given the same sort of formal structure. But there you set up a lobby group, you register with the government saying, I'm setting up a lobby group, this is my lobby, scope of my lobby, and you file an annual return. You get donations, it's official, you spend money, it's official, it's not something sleazy or
under the table.
Your political funding is official, you have to disclose, that's all. So I think maybe if we had lobby groups, there may be less dependence, perhaps, I don't know, but the caste groups have become too strong. So this divisiveness is so strong now that you cannot have really objective conversation.
Right.
So this is, I think, back to the issue of what are some of the Indian assets, I would say family. Americans are suffering, and at one of the cutting edges, the divorce rate, which is now happening here because we're getting westernized, and the whole teen pregnancy and anger, the crime rate, and also with medicine, with medical advancements, people are living longer. The geriatrics industry has made people live longer, but the last 20 years of life is sort of unhappy life.
Very unhappy.
Very isolated, no family. I used to be a hospice volunteer. I've done a lot of different kinds of volunteers to understand society. I was also a volunteer for AIDS Foundation, where I would get them rights from the various government agencies and all that as a person who could negotiate for them. And when I was a hospice worker, they trained me to be the person who is going to help somebody who's dying, who's decided that, okay, he doesn't need any more treatment, there's no hope, then he just wants to die, but they need some help, they need somebody. These are very lonely people. Their kid would be somebody else in some other state, they would send them some flowers,
Greeting card.
but no real love. So I would often be the last person they would talk to. So it is amazing what all they have to say, what their questions are, and I would bring a lot of my philosophy to help them, and it did help them. So this is a very lonely society that in the US, and we're becoming that way. We're picking some of the bad habits.
I'm glad you say this because, recently I read a book called Generation Debt by a very young American writer, Anya Kamenetz. And what she's saying is that post 2008 and the recession and the state of how young people don't get jobs, they take on huge debts to go to university, she came up with this very interesting theory. She's saying that that in America they should promote a 3 generations living together structure where the old people who have their retirement funds can pay for the education of the grandchildren, and the grandchildren in return for that are there instead of their expensive hospital care. Now, I think that we already, with our joint family system,
They probably got it from studying this. A lot of these things a lot of Indian values which we've rejected are actually being reconsidered, brought in
elsewhere.
Yes.
And all we need to do is, if it is at 80%, we need to take it to 100%, make it work in a more modern setup, rather than throwing away the baby with the bathwater, which is sort of being recommended.
See, the idea of a very highly, Puneet and I were talking about this also, the idea of a very highly, Puneet mentioned this, highly individualistic society. Then there is a state which is the granddaddy looking after everybody through Social Security. They're going bankrupt. I mean, every generation is going to get less and less Social Security benefit and have to pay more and more. So this business of state looking after, giving you the safety net has not worked. We had jatis doing that. Jati is the place of last resort. I could always go back to my jati, and no matter what, they take me in. And the worst punishment would be to be kicked out of your jati because of something. So that as an alternative social structure and economic structure. There's a Professor Vaidyanathan in Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. He's done a whole structure on the economic consequences of jatis, and he shows that many of the progressive jatis that have done very well in India's economic boom are actually it's their jati structure and their ability to work together and help each other that makes them so successful. For instance, the Patels owning all these motels, more than half the motel rooms in the US, it is because the Patels are a very well-knit jati. So the Sikhs own a bunch of gas stations, a lot of the gas stations. So if you look at that structure, it's even brought into the United States. Koreans own certain businesses that Korean own.
Delhi.
The Korean delis and laundromats. There are certain businesses in which they kind of got a corner on this. So we have had this jati structure. It's considered very bad and abusive, but actually people are thinking that this is a better alternative than the social security of the state, because that's going to go broke. Maybe the social security system worked in very tiny countries like Sweden, and you cannot scale them. United States cannot make it work. So if we were to Americanize, break down our jati structure, break down our family structure, who is going to do the social security?
And especially given the population that we have.
Huge population. So we have these issues. I think we are giving away some of the things that are social, cultural assets. That's capital we are just throwing away. And others are looking at it, experimenting it, and probably introducing it for themselves. We're picking up bad habits like, if you look at cigarette smoking, there's a decline in the last 10 years in cigarette smoking in the United States. And so where do all these Philip Morris and all these people go? They go to Asia, and there's a big increase in cigarette smoking. So we're picking up these habits. We're picking up the increase in beef. I mean, I'm not want to get into that controversy, but purely as a medical issue.
Or whatever, processed food, I mean.
Purely as a medical issue, there is a huge campaign against red meats in the United States and against, chemical fertilizers. going back to organic, going to organic. My grandmother used to have organic farming. We just introduced all these chemical fertilizers because of boosting production and all that, just blindly doing it, killing a lot of the genetic diversity, biodiversity. Now we are finding that actually the poor farmer who never used chemicals, he's got a crop which is organic, and that has international value of a very high kind. So we are thinking that going from tradition to modernity in a westernized way is actually progress. In some cases, it's destruction.
Absolutely. So before we open it up to the audience for questions, there's something that I wanted to seriously, have a response from you. Now, in the Marxist scheme, though of course it's anathema in this context, but in the Marxist scheme, you say there's a base and a superstructure in any society. The base comes from the economics. So from your production, from the corporates, all of it together. And then you have the superstructure where institutions, culture, all of that is the superstructure. However, the soft power of any country comes from the superstructure too, But the base has to contribute to that in a huge way.
See, I would say that the soft power, visible and projected externally, is pop culture. But what the external people don't see, they see America as a pop culture that's being exported, and they see India, Bollywood, cricket, and all as But the deep culture is what holds it together internally. It may or may not be visible to the outsiders. That is why, unless somebody becomes a student and an expert on America, you will just know them as a pop culture, and that's that we might be losing. We might be losing because of the modernization, the standardization, the standard brands, the standard kind of things we are doing. Maybe we are losing this, and this is a kind of a part of our village culture. I noticed this. I noticed that the Indian who is not yet westernized is a very creative person. So that's one of the strengths, I would say, worth preserving.
I'd like to ask a question which I'm sure everybody has in their minds. Why are we so insecure about our culture? We feel that we are not superior, the Western world is superior, whether it is UK, whether it is America, even continental Europe, anybody. We don't think that we are worth anything when it comes, not anything, but at least they are superior to us.
We'll enjoy our food, we are good in that, so the food is very good because we are proud of it. Women are really, really good at clothes and jewelry, and the women are very fussy, very high standard of buying. When the consumer in India is sophisticated, the producers are producing good stuff. So, you could actually extend that to other areas and say, if we, the consumers, become very fussy and very proud of various other areas of our work, then the producers will have to up their value, up the standard of that. So I think it has to do with whether the public and the consumer of culture has that pride, and where they've lost the pride, the question is it the colonial past? Is it that we just don't think we are going to be good enough? Right now, with the flood of Chinese goods, you will see a generation of Indians who will look up to China with awe the way we used to previously look up to England with awe. It's a kind of a consumerism from China, all the nice things that you buy, for your home and all that, Chinese. So you associate Chinese with superiority. So there is that kind of a hang up also.
Anyone else?
We talked about companies creating a brand differentiation and they go to global markets for Indian companies. Take something from healing or. Are you expecting this from the company leaders or the country leaders? Because if India has to go out and create a brand, it has to go out as a country. For example, you talked about German engineering.
Beautiful, good. See, Japan Foundation is a good model. Korea Foundation, China Institute. They started Confucian Institutes, a few hundred of them. They're called Confucian Institutes. In all three of these examples, it's a corporate government alliance. Government organizes it, put money into it, corporates join in. The Japan Foundation, there was Japan bashing in the first Bush, senior Bush era. that they're dumping products, we should put sanctions on them. You know, if you remember that, there was that Japan bashing era. The Japan Foundation decided that they're going to train 20,000 American school teachers how to teach Japan in a way which is Japan friendly. So they developed these DVDs, they put up 4 centers in the United States where school teachers would be brought, they would be given a little stipend, and they would be taught how to teach Japan back in school, and they would be given the whole kit. And then they would go and teach, and the ones who were very good could come back for an intermediate course, and then the ones who went to advanced course would be sent to Japan at their expense. So whole program. This went on for 5-8 years, 20,000 teachers were trained, and the whole new group of Americans have been taught that Japan are wonderful people, they're good people, because they've been trained a certain way. So Japan Foundation gets credit for that. Korea Foundation has one bookshelf of books on Korea, created very patriotically. There is no caste cows curry type like Indian. If you ask Indians to do it, a lot of these left-wing social scientists would say what all is wrong with us. That's what they'll tell you. So the Korea Foundation has on their history, on their technology, on their dance, music, culture, this, that, all of those things, political history, whatever, very nice. And they give it to libraries. Now I'll tell you an experience. I was chair of Asian Studies in the state of New Jersey. There was a very kind of nice governor who later left. So he created this commission on Asian studies, because the idea being that future generation of Americans will be having to deal with Asia, and they better be well informed. So I was made the chair. So we took a whole, people from all over Asia were on this commission, I was chairing, and so we came up with a whole write-up on what are the major themes in Asia, Asian studies. So one of them was the export of knowledge and culture from India to the rest of Asia. Not only Buddhism as a religion, but a lot of things went. A lot of mathematics went, astronomy went, medicine went, a lot of images, iconography, art, all kind of stuff went, architecture. So we built all these modules. 2 Indians on this were the ones who were always opposing me. They were saying, but why aren't you talking about what's the plight of Dalits? So I said, but in the American school system, these are 6th grade, 8th grade people, you don't teach slavery. I mean, you do not teach that. And when they have modules on France and when they have modules on these other countries, those countries are being taught in a very proud way. But these people were so full of that. So I had to neutralize them. So I had a little gathering in my house. I didn't invite them. I invited the Chinese, the Japanese, the person from Myanmar, the Vietnamese, the Thai people, Cambodians. I invited these representatives. We had a nice discussion. And I said, what do you think? Do you feel that, like they're teaching Western civilization, which is standard to be taught, blacks are wanting to teach African civilizations, how they actually contributed to Egypt, and then Egypt contributed to Greece, and so all of that stuff they're teaching. So why aren't we able to teach all the great positive things? Every one of them supported me. So I said, I'll tell you what, next time we have this Asian Commission meeting, I want you to raise this issue, because those 2 guys won't listen to anything I have to say. So I kept my mouth shut at the next meeting. It was Chinese guy who started this discussion that we don't want any of negative stuff. The Vietnamese guy said this lady from Myanmar was very tough. So they took over, and after that the 2 Indians left. So I have problem with the India art people. A deep inferiority complex about anything positive. You try and say something positive, there will be somebody there raising his hand and saying, but you know, why don't we discuss, we had this suicide the other day, women got burned, some this and that. Well, that's fine, but if you're talking about building a brand, the others are not talking about these issues. Chinese will not, in Harvard, the Tibetans complain that whenever there's a China event, there is no Tibetan descent allowed. They just somehow cleaned out. They complain about it. The Chinese have so much clout that they can demand that. Indian ambassador comes, there'll be all this Kashmir separatist and this Khalistani group and that group, all there shouting one lot. We just haven't had the clout to say, okay, out with those guys. So we are not able to control the brand image of a civilization to the same extent that some other people are. That's
because we don't consider it of strategic importance, that
Also disunity within here. Also we've had two generations of the Romila Thapar children. Irfan Habib, Ramila Thapar. R.C. Majumdar wrote this History of India, multiple volumes, after independence. It was very solid, very patriotic. And then came the age of coalition governments, and Indira Gandhi needed support from the left to create her government. And so what they extracted, nowadays the coalition partners would extract a ministry because you get more bribes that way. But in those days, the left didn't want any ministry. They said, we want all the intellectual positions, the vice chancellorships of universities. That's when all these leftists got in. And the Indian Council of Historical Research, CSDS, these kind of left-wing social sciences institutions were set up and given to the left. So they put in place the entire ideology which we are still living with. It's not been dismantled. Even 2 years of Modi government, they have not really done anything.
No, that's because you need a bunch of intellectuals working on it very seriously to be able to dismantle that as well, to come up with an
You need to replace
alternative.
those guys with people who are qualified. I'm not sure that the Hindu political establishment has really created intellectual resources.
I completely agree.
So do you think that the children have to be not insecure in India, the next generation? They need to learn the right history of India?
Yes.
It
So
has to start from the school.
yeah, and so the strange thing is, yes, this is true. So even the Chinmay mission schools, the Ramakrishna mission schools, they're teaching religious, spiritual ideas, and they're teaching yoga, meditation, good ethics, and so on. But when it comes to history, they're still following a lot of the same stuff. And my foundation started a project on the history of Indian science and technology, and we have now got 10 volumes out. Each volume takes 3 years. Because somebody called Joseph Needham in Cambridge had developed 30 volumes or some large number of volumes on Chinese science and technology. So this became the standard resource book any China Studies Center uses, because when you study the history of China, it's not just about what they were doing, violence and who they were oppressing. It also has to include their contributions to science and technology. This is a very important thing for India to have, a corpus of work on the Indian contributions to science and technology. Nobody would have joined this. I went to IITs, I went to previously Murli Manor Joshi, then this Kapil Sibal, they all talked about, yeah, it's great, but no one was willing to help me. So with whatever resources, we produced 10 volumes, they exist. You can buy those 10 volumes, they exist. But this could be huge. And this kind of a thing ought to be put into the curriculum for schools, because this is written at the university level. This could be put at lower level. This could be made into documentaries. And this kind of knowledge of the intellectual contributions of India is very important part of our history. Because when people think of history in the Indian sense, they think it's all about who invaded whom, and who won and who lost, and which year it happened, and who destroyed what. But that's just one part of history, the history of violence. There's also a history of culture and civilization. Sure. Can you have mic?
When you go and you talk to, like when I went and spoke to my mom's sister and her brother-in-law.
Yeah, we'll get you the mic.
70s and 80s to the US and especially abroad. I think their disinterest in India was a lot more than when some of us went and who came back. So I would still say that so they actually delineated themselves. I'm talking about the internet, from the civilization here. So a lot of those children who grew up connect, because when I speak to my cousins, really for them, like, you see this movie Airlift, which the guy says, I'm a Kuwaiti, and then the Indian government, and then he realizes that India is his identity. Is there some way a problem that the people who went out in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s also let down their children? I'm talking about abroad versus in India. And a lot of us have actually come back and are very proud to be Indians and are now contributing in whichever way. So it's a mixed bag both ways. You can't just blame the government and the schooling system, because there's a very large diaspora that lives abroad also.
It's also parents. Yeah, I agree with you. But this children being alienated from culture, I find that very big time here. I find that very big time here. I find that in the US, I'm feeling that the third generation is coming back. Parents are too busy settling down, making money, buying their car, house, getting security and all that, didn't have any time for this, and were willing to sell out their identity and culture, had inferiority complexes, whatever it is, to just get ahead ahead in the game, which is normal of immigrant groups in the US. So the children were raised without any identity, they lost and all that. But now when those children grow up and the grandchildren come, they are very careful that they don't go through the same. And that is what these Bal Vihars, these Chinmaya mission schools, they're doing. They have, maybe 75, 80, 100 of these Chinmaya mission schools and many others like them. They attract this kind of a group. So that is happening. Here, I'm not sure that there is a corrective pendulum, because here you have the youth who are kind of radically wanting to westernize at the expense of Indianization. See, China has an interesting idea. China says, we'll take all the technology, all the science, all the material benefits, and we will link it to Chinese Confucian history. And so this is China's view. Tradition is not in contradiction to modernity. Tradition of China and modernity, our own way, is part of one continuum. So we need to do that. I mean, we need to do that in the sense that I should be able to protect my tradition, pass it on to the next generation, and be as modern as possible and feel very Indian doing that. Here it is, what is taught is, a Western ideology is taught that tradition versus modernity, because they had to drop their own heritage of Greek, Latin, civilizational heritage. When Christianity came, was replaced by something new, and the old pagan cultures were destroyed and deleted. So in our case, we have not had a history of destroying the past in order to do something new. So every era, there is the Vedic era, then there is the Itihas, the Puranas, all the way, then there's the Bhakti eras. But the old ones are not deleted. It's just built on top of those.
And in Western civilization, this has happened again and again. So
Yes.
the Renaissance meant that the Christian roots were again pushed behind. Then during Victorian period, with Darwinism, once again there was a major crisis of faith and science. But in our case, of course, it, as you're saying, built one on top of the other. We don't.
It has to do with, again, the earlier question which was asked, and I said the ability of Indians to deal with complexity, including contradiction. That there is this and there is also that. हमको ठीक लगता है, कुछ हमको problem नहीं है. That kind of, I don't have to reconcile कि ये ठीक है या वो ठीक है. उसको निकालें, उसको निकालें, comfortable, वो भी सब ठीक है. This kind of an ability, I think, is very interesting, but we are losing it.
You had a question.
If I may, first of all, a confession, I've not been able to read your book, so please excuse me if it's already answered in the book. But I'd like to understand how you define the Indian civilization. Is it the Indus civilization? Where does it extend? Does it start at Pakistan or Afghanistan, or does it start, at our current border? Does it end at,
Okay.
So what do you mean? And
Yeah.
in order to understand
Yeah.
India and Indians,
No, that's
because there
very
was
important.
no India
Yeah.
until
Yeah.
the end of the British rule.
Yeah. So new evidence is coming all the time, which is very nice. Therefore, we need to invest in research. So we are the ones interpreting rather than outsiders interpreting, because a large part of this Indus Saraswati civilization has been interpreted by outsiders. So we are now trying to take control of that. This Indus Saraswati civilization starts from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Sindh to Punjab, Haryana. In fact, the largest town discovered so far is in Haryana. So, and in terms of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa are famous because they were found earlier, and so they are very large though. But numerically also, more 2/3 of the locations are in present-day India. But we look at prior boundary, which all those were part of this. So that is one of the archaeological evidences that needs to be decoded. The language hasn't been decoded yet. The tiles have got very sharp, chiseled, images, but we haven't figured out. There is many competing theories on what it is and what it means, but it hasn't been decoded in a conclusive way. Then there is the oral tradition, which is Vedic. So the British, the Max Muller, Germans and British come up with this theory that these are Aryans who came from somewhere else, which is not true, because you do not find any evidence in those countries of the kind of flora and fauna. They're talking about animals and plants, and they're talking about ocean, and those are landlocked Central Asian countries. They don't have that. The flora fauna doesn't exist. They're talking about huge mountains. They're talking about rivers coming down. So what they're describing exists in this area that I mentioned. It does not exist in Europe or Central Asia. So now what you have to do is to take the oral tradition of texts, Sanskrit, Vedas and all that, and then integrate that with the archaeological evidence. That has not been done. I think then, that gives us an idea of this dual origin, the physical evidence and the intellectual linguistic evidence. But then Indian civilization keeps branching and create many, many things. There is whole Shaivism, the Tantra tradition, the Vedic, the whole Puranas, Itihas, all that kind of stuff. So this grand narrative needs to be written down, needs to be turned into IMAX theaters, we need to have a history channel.
So the Aryan Dravidians are the same civilization?
Yes. No, Aryan Dravidian are the same group of people in India have a linguistic subcategories. It's not a foreign Aryan idea.
And just to just one point, just to add to that the idea of the geography of India is also there in the manner of a sacred geography in Mahabharata and Ramayana. So, there have been works on this, the pilgrim routes that have marked this territory beyond the political boundaries which may have shifted. But pilgrim routes have remained over thousands of years.
See, one of the, they ask for who represents Hinduism. So we know there's many mattas and many organizations. The oldest known are akhadas. Akhadas are sadhu groups. And the sadhu akhadas, as organized groups, they are the owners of the Kumbh Mela, which is the oldest recorded practice, tradition, ritual, whatever you want to call it, of our culture and of any culture in the world. So the history of the Kumbh Mela is a very solid history of who we are, because there is 8,000 years of recorded akhadas. Akhadas, when they have a Kumbh Mela, in a sense it's their event. They are the event managers and they are the event participants. All of us who go are invited guests. It's their event. This is very interesting. Right now, officially and legally, akhadas own the Kumbh Mela. And many of the grounds where the Kumbh Mela is held are owned by the akhadas. But the number of people coming has grown so much, they need to get government lands, rent it, government takes over.
Infrastructural support.
And government gives infrastructure support. But the core Kumbh Mela is an akhada project. I talked to the 13 akhadas now. There used to be more. Then they disintegrated, then they got reorganized, and they disintegrated. Adi Shankara reorganized them, revived them about 1,300-1,400 years ago. Right now there are 13 active akhadas with 1 lakh members to 5 lakh members each, total of about 20 lakh members who are official sadhus. They are each got a name, identity, membership number, so it's a very formal thing. That's a very large group. Now these 13 akhadas have the Akhada Parishad, which is a kind of collection of all 13 represented by one. The Akhada Parishad, I'm delighted, they endorsed my book, which is the first time they endorsed the book, because they endorsed my book because actually I wrote an article on the Kumbh Mela and what dangers it sees. What are the dangers and threats concerning the Kumbh Mela, because it's getting out of hand and many people are infiltrating the Kumbh Mela and it might be in disarray. Every time there's a Kumbh Mela, the astronomical layout of the stars, the different nakshatras, is recorded very precisely. What was the map of the sky, and who are the Mahamandaleshwars? Mahamandaleshwar is the head of each akhada. Who is the Mahamandaleshwar representing each of the akhadas who came, and their names and all that is recorded. So you can go back to the akhada records, and there is software that validates that in that year,
wow,
in fact, the sky was like that. So that you can say, okay, if this was the state of the galaxies or whatever the different systems of stars, you can actually validate that this is not just made up. This is literally how it was. So this record people don't know about. So I was telling them, why don't you publish? You should publish a book on the history of the Akhadas, the history of the Kumbh Mela, and this is the definitive history of who we are, older than Harappa Daro also, because that would be a huge narrative for our people to know. And they are not very sophisticated modern people.
I'm a volunteer for this project.
Yeah.
Please enroll me.
Yeah. So this is the kind of project I love to do if there's resources, because they are very interested now. They realize that they are under threat, that now this business of being isolated sadhus, you cannot just go on because there's encroachment into their turf, into their lifestyle, and so they'll be just finished. There'll be no sadhus left in the next generation. Nobody wants to be one. So they are also interested in bringing out knowledge to educate the public. And if there were people interested, I mean, we would do these projects.
I have a million questions to ask, but I'm going to restrict to one. This is a question which is very close to my heart because I'm an architect. From time immemorial, right down from the colonization of India, governments have made willful decisions to overturn history. Right down from introducing English as a language of civil service. So, post-independence, in the need to industrialize, Nehru actually went out and made a brief for Chandigarh, which said to design a city unfettered by the presence of the past. That was Corbusier's brief. And Corbusier was imported into this country, which has had the skill of master craftsmen and guilds and guilds and guilds of architects, which still make India the country for which the Western world visits us. However bad we do on our tourism numbers, but it is our international presence, a visual of architecture. Till date, and then of the 3 schools of design that existed in this country, almost all graduating batches trained at Chandigarh for the next 2 decades. Then they go out and form the Public Works Department of this country, and we get what we see today. And this continues without patronage, only on a path set by Nehru. Now today, our developers,
very good point.
Our developers go out and say, we need foreign architects. The term foreign architects is absolutely wonderful and fantastic and well incorporated into our system and has become one with the DNA of this country's development.
And I'll tell you one thing. A friend of mine, an Indian, who lives in Princeton, very dear friend of mine, she's an architect. Her company, which is a major American architecture company, got the architecture contract for the Sardar Patel statue by Modi. And I was very surprised. I said, why would they bring an American architecture firm?
Yeah, and when we say foreign...
They asked my advice how to pitch, how do you make it Hindu friendly and all. I just sitting over in their house chatting, I didn't have any formal role, but they wanted to pick a lot of people's brains to make sure their proposal is good, and they came back, they won the contract, then they delivered the first phase, second phase and all that. I don't know, I'm just an observer, but it bothered me that, we have this complex.
And when we say foreign architect, we only mean Gora architect, not African, Japanese.
Today we are okay with Singaporean, we are okay with Vietnamese also, we are okay with South African also. Yeah, it means non-Indian.
Non-Indian, but not African.
No,
African is still not cool.
I want to go one.
Yeah. Okay. No, but let me ask you this. Suppose, hypothetically, if Rajiv Gandhi had married an African rather than Sonia Gandhi, do you think that African wife of his and widow would have been as powerful?
No, of course not.
So, is there a color complex?
So I was coming to that.
Color complex.
So I was coming to that as the next thing. So as a young Indian architect who had studied in Premier Institute, also promoted by Nehru, the concept of Premier Institute, Indian Institute of Technology, School of Planning and Architecture. As a student graduating from that, I felt that there must be a shortcoming in me. So I decide that I will go and get what the best has to offer, and I go and get that. Today in this country, when I try and operate, I said, you want the Indian best? On paper, I have it. You want the Western best? On paper, I have it. Now, please tell me what is it that is bothering you? It is the color. It is clearly the color. Because brand myself has incorporated the best of India and the West.
I'm very glad you raised this. 2 books that educated me a lot, I'll tell you about a little bit, and then I'm writing a sequel to that. The first book was, and I'm trying to understand American history through identity formation. So one book is called How the Irish Became White. Now you all think Irish are white. But in the American system, whiteness was a labor category. You had to join white unions to be called white. So when the blacks were freed from slavery, they would undercut the labor rates and they would get jobs. So to protect white labor, they created white-only unions. That's the origin of unions in America, and they would get contracts that you cannot be hiring non-union people. So this white union origins started. But then when Irish immigrated, the problem was that they were a colony of England. So back home, the guy is a colonized person under the English, but now he comes to America and wants to join as an equal. So they were excluded from being white in terms of unions.
Also, they were Catholics, whereas the
So they were, but the colonization was a factor. So they had a war. They had a kind of a violence and all that, and then a treaty was raised that okay, Irish will be treated as white. So that's the story of how the Irish became white. Then there's another book that influenced me a lot in this, how the Jews became white folks, where until early 1900s, the Jews were not considered whites. Jews themselves didn't think of themselves as whites. And so all this, how they mobilized, how they created the Anti-Defamation League and legal cases, whatever, and the Jews finally became white. And one of the books I'm writing on is how the Indians become white. Now, the Indians becoming white is not white skin necessarily. It's also ideological, your accent, your style, and is it, what is the latest you can talk about? What is the latest lingo, name dropping? So it is an intellectual branding, emotional, cultural whiteness. That
This kind of branding goes against the very notion of branding yourself as an Indian.
That is correct.
So therefore, success is doomed.
So we may end up being a second class Western satellite country, and we cannot hope to be a superpower like China, because China is not interested in being somebody's satellite. Yeah. China says we are who we are, and you have to accept us as we are. China has even got another internet. They're building their own internet, which will be 100 times the speed of this internet, because they don't trust that this traffic is being monitored and wiretapped and all that. So China is creating everything on its own. China is sending a lot of its people to go and get MBAs and technology degrees and come back to China. But China is also in parallel creating itself an education hub and bringing people from Africa, Latin America, developing countries, more foreign students coming to China every year than Chinese students going out. You see, so China is doing both. They also want to replace the West as a center of learning, and we don't have that. We are not creating Indian, universities like Nalanda, Takshashila kind of places where we could be training the rest of the world in our way of life and our civilization. We are very happy that we are being educated somewhere else. So this, what you are referring to, is a product of wanting by policy to westernize.
Sir, I have a different question. I think that one of the challenges I see with Indians sometimes is that we, rather than looking at the glass half empty, half full, we always look at glass half empty. And I tell you, there are hundreds of success stories. Look at the top 35 out of 50 companies in India who, have succeeded. And I'll tell you the big challenge, and I didn't ask, but Shilpa has asked me to allude the question. The biggest problem with the civilization is actually how Hindus think about Hindus and how do they portray themselves. So it's the 50% who, I'm a Sikh, so I can ask that question because I think of myself as a Hindu actually. And I say, for me, my identity is because, I'm an Indian. And I see when you go brand yourself in a way where you're already accepting that you're not the best, I think you've admitted defeat. I'll tell you, look at Satya Nadella, you look at Sundar Pichai, you look at Rana Talwar. There are many Indians who've done and risen to global peaks. Tell me 5 Chinese that have risen to global peaks.
Yeah. So, fair enough. The question to be asked is whether these American CEOs who are Indians, in their public display, not with other Indians,
I agree with that.
Whether they feel they're Indian or not, whether they've discarded that Indianness as a price to rise, and you will see that they generally have. They have also, so they are ethnically, genetically, DNA Indian, but maybe in their investment, where are they invested, where is their future, it may not be that much linked to India. I mean, I mixed with a lot of these people. In the town I live, there's a lot of exceedingly well-to-do Indians who've done very well. Princeton is a very elite kind of town. And I feel that they're mixed up, they're sort of, ghar mein puja hogi, Diwali hogi, but the way they're raising the kids and the way they want to project themselves in the public, they will not stick their neck out for Indian culture. They will compromise, unless it's an Indian gathering, it's all double baat hai. So that is true. Chinese are not going about it as an individual achieving success as CEO. Chinese are going about it collectively. Let me tell you this, China has built a one layer at a time strategy. So first is the back office, then value added into certain technologies and industrial products. You don't find Chinese consumer goods today. You don't find a Toyota, you don't find a Samsung, but that's coming. You will find the Chinese using their cash to invest in global brands, buying them out. So you will see the Chinese entering the global CEO by acquisition and also organic growth. China is not only going to stop at low cost manufacturing. So it's not just that. They're actually going to go into the
higher up the value chain
and consumer products. Right now there's no Chinese brand in the US in most categories, but you will see it coming. They are marketing in other places. India mein market kar rahe hain. So they're testing out these things, getting their feet wet. They're very systematically going about it. You will see Chinese buying off one of the major TV networks. One of the top 3-4 TV networks, they just buy whatever billions it takes, just acquire it, put Chinese people there, and then you will see it like Al Jazeera is doing for the Arabs, a certain branding.
Yes.
Chinese will do that. Huh?
It's not permitted today by the FDI regulation.
No, I'm talking about in the US.
Oh, right.
Yeah, in media won't right here. But I'm saying that Chinese entry into the Western countries has now reached a place where they got so much confidence, so much cash, they will go into all. They're less interested ke 5 Chinese as individuals become CEOs. That's not their style. It's not so entrepreneurial.
So we have time for one more last question.
One just small question, sir, as you mentioned, that Indians are not allowed or they're not working in Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria. But to be honest with you, I think it's all media. It's the other way around, like American company, Halliburton KBR, which is one of the largest beneficiary of Rebuild Iraq. Today is procuring over $3 billion worth of goods. I'm involved in infrastructure and I've done a lot of business in Iraq, pre-war, post-war, and now also be doing it. But they're buying over $3 billion worth of electrical equipment from India, which is going to Iraq under the American label of Halliburton. And it's all, I think, to do with media. Whereas the Iraqis or the Afghanis, they would prefer to come and deal directly. It's the Indian laborers who are building up their transmission lines and substations. So,
we're subcontractors.
So we are basically subcontracting. But eventually, the products are going. The services are being used from India.
That's good to know.
I represent an electrical industry which is worth $25 billion. $5 billion is the export. $3 billion is only to these war-prone countries where things are happening today.
So my question was very simple.
How about the mic?
I can
Yeah.
No, but I think it'll be better.
maybe वैसे ही सुनाई देगी.
Yeah.
No, so all evening we've been speaking about this idea of the Indian and the Indian identity, and I'm very confused because I came to this country 20 years back, and I lived here, and I'm Sonali's better half. I'm also an architect, and we worked across different parts of this country, metros, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 towns, and I to date struggle with the idea that I think that Bengal is Bengali first and Indian second. Tamil is Tamil first and Indian second. The notion of the Indian nationhood is actually a very nebulous construct. It is a very, very young construct. It's 60, 70 years old.
No, that's a very colonial construct that was manufactured like that. This is what was trained to Oxford and Cambridge. Civil servants were trained on this. The idea of India is very old. That's why we were talking about the pilgrim routes.
No. You're completely wrong. There is a region, okay? There is a region of South Asia, right, which includes Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka. It's a region, and this region has grown over an evolutionary period of about 10,000 years with with cultures and subcultures forming. The idea of India is colonial. It is not.
No.
So let me can I finish
Okay.
my point if you don't mind? Okay. So and I actually was addressing the question.
Yeah.
You are right
Please.
in some
So-
way, and I would like to.
So just to conclude my
I'll
question.
mediate between the two of you.
No, let me just conclude my question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you say that Indians are a particular way, and Indians are not a particular way, who are we really referring to between the self, the community, the state, and the nationhood?
Okay. So I think the bigger issue that you raised is the idea of India being old or new. I agree with you. The idea of a modern state as currently defined, official, formal state, constitution, rule of law, common military, currency, or all that, is new. But a cultural unity, a cultural spiritual unity exists by virtue of the fact that if you look at Adi Shankara in way back, traveling to the four corners of this country because he saw there's something in common. Every 100 miles a different language, but still it is, if this is not common, why would he consider this the space, this is the geography that he has to boundary here with these mattas that he started. Even before that, you look at the Shakti Pitams, the 108 Shakti Pitams of the Devi, they go all over Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all over India, with a sense of unified architecture. There's an architecture of the Shakti Pitams, which is a unified architecture spread across all this. You see the old narratives in the south of Kashmir, the mountains, Mount Kailash, it's all part of the folklore and the itihas of India. And you see the people in the north talking about Rameshwaram and the whole Lanka story. So if you look at the stories, the narratives that are in people's imagination as a sense of who we are. If you take Ramayana as a sense of, for a certain genre, for a certain period in history, a sense of a collective narrative of who we are, it is across geographical, it is spread across the geography. So that is a sense not of India but of some entity maybe you can't name. It is not a political...
Bharat Varsha, this term exists for a long time. And just to add one example that I'll give you from a field that is not considered religious, drama, the Natya Shastra, that is the area of my study. My PhD is on the Natya Shastra. Chapter 14 of the Natya Shastra, it tells the different theatre performers about the different parts of India and how performances vary. So the performer must know local cultural variations, and if you look at the chapter, it's available, you'll see that the examples are drawn from different parts of India that would correspond geographically to what we have.
Thank you. I think we'll have to call it a night. So we will have
final words.
Yeah, we will have a chance
I want to understand better.
We will have a chance to meet you after this. There is something to eat. But thank
Sure.
you very much, Rajiv, for taking the time.
Well, wonderful to meet all of you guys.
To be with us. Thank you.
I'm really
That
glad
was
to meet all you guys. You asked some interesting questions and we'll continue this conversation.
Absolutely. I think.
Thank you very much.
In summary, you told us about why our civilization doesn't have pride. I think that is the crux of it. I've always thought about this. Would I buy a television even if it had the Tata brand or the Godrej brand, even though I know all the TVs are manufactured in the same factory in China, right? Would I actually buy it, or would I still go and buy another brand? And I think that is a question all of us have to ask. And that's the question Sonali also, talked about. Why do we have this affinity to certain brands? You talked about that you need to be known for something.
And brand premium is worth billions of dollars.
I would absolutely agree. Yeah. Thank you very much for being there. I'd like to thank Mr. Yaduhari Dalmia for inviting you and Shilpa. Really appreciate your bringing Rajiv to us. If I can please request Divya Suri Singh to come up and give you a small token of our appreciation.
This is really nice of you.
5 trees planted in your name.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think you gave us a challenge. I think our moderator put her hand up for that. I think it's a challenge for YPO. Can we take that upon ourselves to help and document the history of the Kumbh Mela?
Would be wonderful.
I think it is within us, at least some of us, to want to think about this. Yeah. Thank you very much, Rajiv. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Still below 40 or above 40? I know. Which now I want to be.